round two of the show to be named later if it does get a new name. We've heard from the people they like the name. Although this was really the only other option we gave them at the time, but they sure do like it.
When you say the people, are we
I
talking
mean,
about one
Craig Harmon.
guy? Say one guy has commented,
Well,
which is
hey,
at this point, I think, 50% of our fan base.
it might be. It might be. Andy, I had a bummer of a weekend on Saturday. Texas losing the SEC championship. Um, I want to get your take on that whole loss, what it looked like from the Texas end, and then I'm going to give you my spin, and you can tell me if my spin is bullshit or not.
I mean, I'm familiar with the idea that football continued to be played after November 30th. What I've done since November 30th for no particular
First of
reason,
all, the
just because
Dallas Cowboys didn't know that when they blocked a punt and didn't bother to yeah, and
far as I
lost.
know, football ended 2 weeks ago. I've watched Wicked. I've seen Gladiator 2. I started then finished the Cross series on Prime. I've watched a documentary on John Benet Ramsey, which had absolutely no new information in it. So that was
Oh, good. Thank
fascinating.
you. Just saved us a couple of hours because Jessica and I had bookmarked that for.
I mean, it's like well done, but if you knew anything about it, you already know what's gonna. I mean, you know what's
It's
gonna
not like the
happen.
Melendez brothers show, which revealed new information.
No, not even a little bit. It's
All right.
redigging the same Earth in 4K. So if you needed a 4K
Version of that poor little
redux
girl's
of
murder.
yeah, if you
Yeah.
needed some upscaling of some news footage from 25 years ago, there it is. Um, no, to your question, I think we can sit and tear apart the game. The ultimate piece of the game, the ultimate thing for the game for me, and really what I've seen from your team for the last several weeks is that you're an incredibly dynamic offense between the 20s.
Hmm.
But Quinn Ewers, if the ball is in his hands and it's his game to win in the red zone, it's like I want to say 50-50 whether or not you guys are even going to score at this point. And I don't know what's happened because you were certainly scoring a lot more points earlier in the year. But it feels like once the field contracts, teams that have decent lateral speed can take away your running game, and then you're leaving it to Quinn Ewers to not throw interceptions. And so far, that's kind of worked out, kind of not, but it's just he's not making great decisions, and it's costing your team games.
Whenever we were working on our other show, both of us at the beginning of the year thought it was really silly to give Arch Manning the job over Quinn Ewers. And even when Quinn Ewers came back after the injury, we thought it was silly. I think I'm now on starting Arch Manning. And I'll tell you why. To your point, he threw those two interceptions. I'm sorry, he threw those two passes into the end zone. He basically was supposed to be throwing a fade, but he threw it on a line. He threw him out of bounds, leaving it to default to a kick to a field goal. But and I know that you and I are not, when it comes to our baseball team, all about reading what the mental state of a baseball team is. But on a 21-year-old kid, you can tell whether he had no comfort level in that stressful position, and he looked like he knew before he even took the snap he was not going to complete those passes. And I feel like beyond the confidence that Arch Manning brings, having a running dynamic from a quarterback down in the end zone seems like a good thing.
Well, and I mean, I don't want to pile on yours because I think he's a good quarterback. I think he's a good college player, but something has happened in the last several weeks. It doesn't even feel like he is trying to avoid getting hit or he's afraid of getting hit because he certainly takes some ill-advised sacks while you're down there. But it's just he's lost the ability to read the defense. And I don't know if that's him and his receivers being on the wrong page a lot or him just making a host of bad decisions. But I mean, realistically, and I'm not, you guys won the A&M game. Fair. I'm not
Sure.
arguing the result of that. But had we held on to two interceptions that literally hit us in the hand,
Yeah.
that's a different football game. And nothing else would have had to change except Quinn Ewers managed not to give the ball away in those two situations where he was clearly trying to, or at
Well,
least it
to your
felt that
point
way.
too, the only points was the world's worst pick six. Like,
Yeah. Um, and the Georgia game was similar. He got down into a compressed field, and it's just the decision making went out the window. And I don't know, a fade versus a kind of a direct line pass, that's one thing, but you've got to be aware of your situation. You've got to be aware of the what the opponent's doing to you, what they're expecting you to do. And at some point, Sark's got to either put Arch Manning in for that different element of being able to run the ball or call different plays for Ewers to execute because it feels like the defense knows what's coming and Ewers isn't able to get out of those situations. And so it's either you turn the ball over or maybe you set yourself up for a field goal. And Bert Auburn, which is probably your other factor, um, it's like 50-50
Yeah.
outside 40 yards whether or not he's going to hit a ball.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that Chris Fowler and Kurt Herbstreit seem to think he's the best kicker in college football. I did not get
Yeah.
that.
I'm not sure
I
what
mean,
game
they
he
was
was
like
watching.
he's got the range. They were showing the yard to make line. I think I commented or texted you at like 52 yards. Has he ever hit a
No.
52-yard field goal?
No, no, he hasn't. And one of the things, it's funny you bring that up. I'm so tired of the, well, in practice, he was kicking him 60. Sure, off a tee without being blitzed, without worrying about somebody having to catch it and hold it in timing. So please,
With nobody watching him?
yeah, media guys, can we stop that, please? Can we stop that narrative? Yeah, so and that's why I think I've definitely changed my stance of look, I think Manning brings an element of unpredictability beyond the fact that he can run on schedule, he's also able to be better moving around the pocket when the pocket closes down. And if you have a quarterback, as you know, if you have a quarterback that the defense now has to say, I have to account for you in this game, you've taken one other defender out of the scheme, and it just seems like something that Texas ought to seriously consider.
Yeah. Or committing to just blasting people off the line with your offensive line and running Wisner, which seemed to be
Didn't
not a
work
thing.
on Georgia, yeah.
It didn't work on Georgia. It certainly will work on your next opponent and probably on Arizona State when win your first round game. Congratulations. And this is not me picking on Texas because I think it was long determined whoever got the fifth seed was going to have the easiest path.
Sure.
It certainly worked out that way. Home
Yeah,
game
and
against,
and I want to get into that in a second. I have one more question about this game, but I want to get into that because I don't know how people couldn't forecast exactly what all the people like us had been saying as being the reality. But my last question is, you and Scott McIntyre had famously been preparing me for SEC referees from the beginning. And Texas has
yeah,
been a pretty low penalized team all year, and all of a sudden had 11, including a roughing the passer that was weaker than the roughing the passer not called, and all the holding calls in the world. Now, Georgia won that game, but it doesn't make me like a bad loser to also point out that if they don't get called, like the same guy got called for being in the neutral zone, yet in the video he was never in the neutral zone. But back to back plays, he had two interceptions reversed because he was in the neutral zone.
yep. I, I wish there was some commentary or some enlightenment that I could say, well, the SEC refs or the SEC officiating crews are horrible. And of the Power Four,
I think it's four now.
oh,
Yeah, it's four.
yeah, of the Power Four, and whatever you call Washington State and Oregon State up there, um, they have by far the best football product and simultaneously the worst officiating in college football. It's not close or funny. I don't want to get into the conspiracy theories of it being corrupt. I
I
think they're
don't
just.
think it's corrupt. I think it's just
Well, there are certain members of my fan base and other fan bases that will tell you that, well, if you're playing Alabama, you're playing the refs. A&M fans certainly believe that if we're playing Texas, we're playing the refs. Um,
Oh, I heard that all last night. Like people,
yeah,
they don't want Texas to come in and win the SEC in their first year.
no,
I don't.
there are people who absolutely believe that. And it's hard to explain how bad the officiating is without there being some overarching conspiracy to prevent you from doing something. I mean, I don't think that's true, but I understand where people get to that theory or that concept. It's mind-numbing how bad they are. And
Yeah,
we all thought 12 years ago, 13 years ago, that we're going to leave the Big 12. We're going to get rid of this bad officiating. There are certainly games over this past decade where I was like, I wish we had Big 12 officials because at least they might call holding.
yeah. I think Sark gave the quickest halftime address to Holly Rowe ever when he just said maybe they'll get called for holding in this half too. But it did like an offside well, first of all, you can't get mad at a false start. False starts are usually pretty quick, clear. Although I do believe that they were drawn by the defense into the false start, but losing that 5 yards took a field goal off the board, and you ended up going um, to overtime because of that. I
Well,
do think you could.
you never want to be talking about the officiating after a big game. And if you are, that means they failed somehow.
Yeah. Look, the bottom line is Texas got 264 yards to 54 yards in the first half. They only led by three. Some of that was due to the officiating, and some of that was due to what we had talked about earlier. The field got tight, and then they had to settle for field goal or field goal attempts instead of touchdowns. Anybody could see that coming at halftime. We've seen it enough in a baseball game where you let the guys hang around long enough, they're going to end up biting you.
Yeah, and I mean, this isn't even a situation where you were letting a inferior team hang around and stay in the game. You're
Sure.
basically punching against a peer, had them on the ropes, but could not land the knockout blow. Um, and that's, ultimately what it is. I am, I'm sorry that it did break your string. I
I
can
mean,
tell
me
you there
too,
are
but
SEC fans that are not sad that your string was broken. But yeah, it's going to be it'll be interesting to see how the dynamic changes over the course of time because I don't think it's tenable. And I said that I've been saying that for a decade, and SEC fans longer term than me have been saying it for longer than that. It just can't be tenable to have a superior product on the field that's being hampered by the officiating when everybody knows how bad the officiating is.
yeah, I do. I use the baseball comparison again, where the argument about robo umps. I don't want to watch the best athletes in the world have the game affected by people. They're doing their best, but still, at the end of the day, we can make it better. It can be better, and I think you mentioned on our last episode, the NFL uses professional referees. They used to not. They do now.
Yeah.
Maybe college football ought to step in that direction as well.
Well, it's never made sense to me, certainly with the amount of money now. Maybe it did 45 years ago, where your insurance salesman is going to be calling the Baylor Tech game on the weekend, so he can't be in the office on Friday. Cool. Your high school principal also happens to be reffing the Oilers Cowboys game. Whatever. But in 2024, when we're talking multi-billion dollar television contracts
Yeah.
and the I hate to say it, the betting infrastructure around college football, all the other variables around college football that cost so much money to produce these games, to field these teams, to fund ticket prices, all that stuff. Um, you have this one factor that just continues to drag it down and makes it a lot less fun if you're on the receiving end of some of this stuff. And I'm not whining about A&M season. We are what we are, but there was not a holding penalty called against an A&M opponent in the last 4 games.
Wow.
That's almost a statistical impossibility. And I'm
Well,
not
it is
saying
because
that,
you can make the argument there's holding on every play, really.
right. You would think just a courtesy one or two a game would be enough, especially when you have two defensive ends that, in theory, are NFL draft picks in the top two, 2 or 3 rounds. Those guys are going to get held by just by the nature of the game
Yeah.
at least once.
Wow, I didn't know that. Maybe there is a conspiracy.
I mean, it could be.
Maybe it
There's
could be.
conspiracies about everything, Jim.
Now,
That's why I
one of the
don't.
big
That's why
conspiracies
I'm not on
was,
Twitter anymore.
yeah, God, I'm so glad. I sometimes I take a look at that, and I'm so glad it's not a thing I do anymore. Now, um, Nick Saban has started calling the alarm bells on this a long time ago, basically at the beginning of the year. I don't know how people couldn't have seen this coming, but as you mentioned, Texas has the fifth seed, which is probably the most favorable seed to get to the national championship game, particularly when you already have 2.5 weeks off anyway. So it's not like health becomes a major concern. Um, how come the powers that be did not understand? Look, let me back up. I think winning your conference should be a thing that's rewarded. And I think an automatic bid to the playoff is that thing. But giving them a bye when now basically what you're doing is you're making you've got some of the highest seeded teams. Like I think they said Georgia actually has the toughest route to the playoff, to the championship when you factor in who they'd have to play. How did they not see this coming or
Uh,
react to it?
Well, I think because they got it backwards. First of all, when all this format was decided on, there was a Power Five. Nobody was expecting the Pac-12 to completely disappear off the
True.
map. So now you have a situation like this year where it would have been possibly a Pac-12 champion, maybe a USC, maybe an Oregon that's sitting in that 4 seed. It's now the Big 12 champion.
Got it.
Um, and so you've basically eliminated one of your options are a Big 12 champion at this point or a Group of Five champion to be your fourth seed.
Hmm.
That is going to be, and I'm sorry, my U of H and Baylor and Tech and fans, Kansas State, whoever is still in that league, it's just not as good a brand of football. And the fact that you're going to be playing in I don't even remember what bowl game they're going to get, but potentially playing the winner will be
Arizona
playing the
State's the Peach Bowl because that's where Texas would go if
Peach Bowl.
if they
Yeah,
beat Clemson.
I just couldn't remember the ball. So say Texas beats Clemson, which they're favored to do, although we can talk about that game when we get closer to it, because I think Cade Klubnik is the kind of quarterback that might give you guys a little bit of problem. But you should win that game. It's a home game against a team that you're ranked well ahead of. Then you have to play Arizona State, which is an inferior football team. Could they win? Sure. Are they likely to win? Probably not. This would be a game that I would say, and I hate this thing, but Texas loses more than Arizona State could win.
Got it. Yeah.
I think if the Texas that showed up against Georgia and can't score inside the 20s shows up, they're going to lose a lot of games. I think that the amount of money you're paying Sark and his staff, and for frankly your roster, you should be expected to win these next two games pretty handily.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a format problem. And the simple answer, of course, NCAA won't do anything simple. Simple answer is, like you said, conference championship gets you in the playoffs, but the seeding is determined by rankings or computer model or whatever, not by let's give the top four conference champions. But it was a concession to get everybody into the system. So that's why it is the way it is. I think the more complicated thing will be to move to 16 teams probably within 3 years, 4 years. A lot of that will depend on how much money is made over the next 2 or 3 years before they decide to expand. But ultimately, that's where we're going to go is we're going to keep adding teams to this playoff mix, and nobody gets a bye.
Yeah, I think I see it topping out at 16 right as we kind of line up, and
Yeah,
I think it could be 14. As I could think it'd be I think it could be 14 as soon as next year. Actually,
yeah. I'm not familiar with how the contracts work and what kind of outs or provisions or changes they're allowed to make midstream, but certainly the next time it comes up for review, I see it getting to 16, and that's probably where it should max out. The people who are afraid that it's going to turn into the NCAA basketball tournament, there's not going to be a world where it's 68 teams
sure.
competing for the playoffs because that's what the regular season is.
Yeah, completely agree. It does look like, I mean, just to your point though, this would be the teams that would have a bye if we did it the way you and I just described. Oregon would have a bye, Georgia would have a bye, Texas would have a bye, Penn State would have a bye, and then Notre Dame would be that fifth seed that would start would have the game at in South Bend. Now, one of the things that used to that it's kind of cracking me up a little bit because as much as I never grew up an Oilers fan, the debate always for the Oilers in the playoff was can a dome team from the South go to the North and win? Well, we're having that debate again now when we're going to see teams like, oh, I don't know, having a home game at in Happy Valley, Pennsylvania, um, you know, starting this year. So, how much do you like? Well, does SMU have a fighting chance, even if they were the same talent level of Penn State to go in there and win? Or, does Tennessee go into Ohio State? Probably not as big a drastic temperature wise, but the weather's going to be a factor in these games.
Um, the Tennessee Ohio State thing I think is probably my most interesting matchup of the first round. Because I think I mean, they're the 8 and 9 seed. They're two evenly matched teams in a lot of ways. And I think that, no, the weather's not going to be as big a deal. But you're also talking about potentially playing in Ohio at the end of December where it could be -10.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so the home team would have an advantage in from that standpoint. They'll have, at the baseline, a familiarity with playing in that kind of weather. But they'll also have all of their equipment. Road teams only travel with a certain amount of cleats, so maybe they bring not the 2 inch cleats, just the 1 inch
I
cleat.
need John Madden describing this right now. I need him going over the length of the cleats. I need him to take seven
Yeah,
minutes to do it.
all of those things. And how does, extreme weather affect a passing game where Tennessee likes to be able to pass the ball downfield? That'll be a fun game because Ryan Day doesn't win big football games. So, I mean, who
He's
knows?
playing for his job in that game. I believe.
He
I believe
should
if he
be.
loses
I
that game,
mean,
he's done.
as much as we talk about, the winner, the coach of Texas or A&M losing or winning a game because of, it was certainly 13 years ago about how that game turned out. Ryan Day hasn't beaten Michigan in now 4 seasons.
Yeah.
I think watching that game, they were talking about the 11 guys that were seniors on the Ohio State team who had never beat Michigan, and that's never happened before.
Oh wow. Yeah, because I don't even
Um,
think OU has a 4 game winning streak on us in that game.
so I mean, that's going to be it's going to be interesting. Uh, on the other hand, I like chaos, so I am rooting for, and I'm sad that they're in the same bracket for Boise State and SMU to win all their games. It mainly because I'm tired of hearing that they can't do it, they shouldn't do it, and all that. This is the format that we asked for. Maybe
Yeah.
not the seating that we asked for, or the bracket that we asked for, but we asked for everybody who could possibly be considered to win have the chance to win. This is what we're getting.
Well,
Um,
I put together a bracket
as
last
I
night.
point to a screen that's completely not on our camera, and look at this.
Yay. I put together a bracket that I'll post with this thing, but I do have Texas winning the national championship and beating Notre Dame to do it. But just looking at it, where from the perspective of, I don't think Carson Beck's going to be healthy. And that guy was a cool story, but even Texas started to shut him down after that first drive. And so I think Notre Dame's got a good enough defense to beat Georgia. And I think Oregon and Ohio State beat each other up enough that Texas gets by. And so, we'll obviously have a time for you to pick the bracket yourself as we get closer. But I think it's going to be interesting. I like the idea of the home games. I like the idea of increasing and adding another level of home games for the playoffs. But right now, it just seems weird. But I think the one thing that I want you to address before we move on to other stuff, I am tired though of the narrative that somehow Bama got screwed and therefore should stop scheduling non-conference opponents that are tough when 3 of their losses were to unranked teams. It wasn't about the non-conference games they scheduled. It was about getting. I mean, the minute they got boat raced by Oklahoma, that should have removed them from the conversation anyway.
I think the argument is valid. I think Alabama is the wrong people to be taking up that argument or taking on that argument on the behalf of. Alabama is simply getting thrown in there because it's the brand name that people,
Well, and their AD did make a big announcement that they're readdressing how they schedule non-conference opponents because that in their
yeah.
mind that's why they didn't get in.
But yes, yeah, you're absolutely right. Alabama didn't do anything resume wise to deserve to be in the playoffs. I think my issue becomes the committee that's selecting these, however it's being selected, whether it's formula, whether it's 10 guys in a room, whatever it is, you've got to look at what these resumes actually look like and not just win loss this stuff into oblivion. And I think there's the assumption that some of that's happening, but some of the all the resumes aren't the same, and it's one of the inequities of college football. The SEC plays 8 conference games. The Big 12 plays 9 conference games.
Yeah.
That's a huge issue right there. Um, right now, it's not wrong. There is no incentive to play a harder non-conference schedule because nobody cares. At least that's what it looks like based on this
Right.
year, based on the last couple of years, really. All they care about at the end of the game, end of the day, is wins and losses. Um, so until the committee penalizes somebody for filling up a schedule with Western Kentucky like level teams, there's no incentive not to do that outside of ticket sales for those games at your home stadiums because you're not traveling to Western Kentucky to play that game.
Yeah.
So Alabama fans aren't going to turn out the way they would turn out to see a Notre Dame or an Oklahoma or whoever. Um, Oklahoma's in the same. I'm not ever going to get used to these conferences, by the way. Oklahoma's in the same conference as
They're all
Alabama now.
changing again in 2 years anyway. Don't worry about it.
Sure. Um, so yeah, it's I think the argument is valid because I think there's some concerns about how it's picked. But all we've done is shuffled it down the list because last year we were worried about the fifth team that got left out. Now we're worried about the 13th team that got left out. When you move to 16s, we're going to gripe about the 17th team that got left out. If you follow college basketball, the 69th team always gets. I mean, it's not. The media needs some controversy to sell. And then when there's a brand name that got left out of the first college playoff and everybody assumed they were going to be in and tried to get them in
Mhm.
from a politicking standpoint, it didn't work. I would say some people would argue the system worked the way it was supposed to. But
Yeah.
Alabama did nothing to. There's nothing in Alabama's resume that says this is obviously a playoff team.
Yeah. If they didn't get in because they had lost to those games and those are the only games they
Yep.
lost, then you have a valid argument. But again, you lost to Vanderbilt. I will before we jump into Juan
You
Soto.
lost to Vanderbilt in Oklahoma. And Vanderbilt had a decent season this year, but Oklahoma is dog shit.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is for as much as the easy narrative is to trash Texas's schedule, which first of all, look, they scheduled a tough non-conference opponent. They didn't realize that Michigan was going to fall off the face of the earth. They also did beat teams that were ranked at the time and they were no longer ranked. But one of the things you can do is look at the like opponents between them and Alabama. And Alabama got beat by Oklahoma and Texas boat raced Oklahoma. So I think Texas is not as unknown a quantity as the national media for some reason wants us to believe.
No, but again, the national media has to have controversy to sell, or else people won't click in because you can only take so much of 4 hours of game day on Saturday morning and the personal stories about the quarterback whose sister lost a leg and rescued a dog in a fire swamp.
First of all, I want to see the adaptation. I want to see the reenactment of that thing. Hey, speaking of jumping into something deep and wide, let's jump into Juan Soto's bank account. Look, Mets fans, you gotta they got the win. They got the win yesterday because Steve Cohen did the thing that I don't think any Yankee fan thought was possible, and he straight up outbid the Yankees for Juan Soto. What are your thoughts on the deal, though? Just the enormous. Is it so big it doesn't even matter because it's gonna like it just seems. I don't know. Your thoughts on it because I don't even know what to think.
Well, I will tell you that the most prominent Yankee fan in the media, Buster Olney, just laughed and laughed because the Mets overpaid and got played. Because that's the new narrative coming out of New York, by the
Yeah.
way. No,
When it
I
turns
think
out the offers were similar, and if Heyman's right, there was a personal issue with how Soto's family was treated by Yankee security, basically getting racistly kicked out of Yankee Stadium.
you've been to the Bronx, right?
Yeah,
Did this
I've been to
surprise
the
you?
front. Yeah, got it.
Um, we were talking about money we're talking about literally an amount of money that was more than Jim Crane paid for the Astros when he bought them in 2002, 2012, whatever that year was. By a large amount. It's not, I mean, it's just made up money at this point. You're going to pay this guy $51 million a year. None of it's deferred, which I don't get. I don't get the owners. I know we talked about it last week, but there's no danger in him deferring that money
None.
outside of having that fixed cost. They chose not to do it. Will they regret this deal from years 10 to 15 if he doesn't opt out? Maybe, but who cares? The Mets had a couple missions. You need a player that's a superstar to go along with Lindor. The Mets were on the verge of making a World Series this year. They
Hmm.
got beat by a good Dodgers team. Uh, and they took all the market steam away from the Yankees. There is nothing the Yankees can do, at least in the free agent market at this point, to take away the thunder that the Mets just took. The Mets right now own the New York baseball market, and that's a big deal. Coincidentally, season tickets went on sale yesterday, about 2 hours after the announcement was made. So there's that. Um, No, we're talking ridiculous money. My big concern is that it changes the market for Alex Bregman. I
Well,
don't think it necessarily changes the result of where Bregman signs, but certainly the dollar amount he's going to get just went up, and all free agents because that rising tide
well,
raises all the ships.
and we are capitalists, and good for them. and people you should get whatever bag you think you're worth. It does look like though that there's a CBS for whatever it matters predicts that Bregman will be a Red Sox, but it does seem like things got tougher. Yet when all those news, all the sort of those hypotheses and the idea that the Yankees are now prioritizing Alex Bregman, both Espada and Dana Brown made their way to a microphone to point out the fact that he is still the Astros' number one priority and are still very much in conversations with Boris on that. Has it changed your prediction about whether you think Bregman's going to end up an Astro?
No, and the issue's still the years. It's always fascinating to me that the very rarely are you going to see the national media, and whether it's Heyman, Olney, Passan, whoever you want to talk about, predict Alex Bregman to the Cincinnati Reds because they don't talk to anybody in the Cincinnati Reds organization. They're not going to predict them to the Royals. I was shocked that somebody called him to the Tigers at some point during the offseason, but then I remembered Hinch was the manager, so that's about the thought level that I'm surprised they got to that deep in the thought level. Um, we're going to tie the next best free agent to the Yankees, to the Red Sox, to the Dodgers, whether those teams need a third baseman or not, because they're the big market teams who talk to us
Got it.
in the
Yeah.
media. I don't think it's anything more complicated than that. And I do think that, some of the negotiating that happens with the media, I think that Brown and Espada basically had to get in the line and say, no, 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 we're still there. We're still good. I was a lot more interested in some of the stuff that Brown said otherwise yesterday about everybody on the roster is available for trade, including Kyle Tucker and Framber Valdez, because I started mentally trading Framber Valdez again a couple of times.
Well, that's my next takeaway is we have to acknowledge two realities can be the same. Is the Astros very much can be competitive for a World Series next year, and also are going to need to restock the farm system because even though they weren't punished, they actually were punished. But like to me, if you're able if you know, okay, you're going to sign Alex Bregman, and you know therefore you're not going to sign Kyle Tucker because his fee just went up based on the Soto deal. He won't get Soto dollars, but he's not going to get not Soto dollars necessarily. So you have to be open to the fact that you can get a major league ready player and maybe some prospects for somebody like Framber Valdez, who we have a surplus of starting pitching. So, I mean, where are you as far as is there anybody untradeable outside of like Jordan and Altuve?
I think you mentioned the two guys. I mean, I think Hader's probably untradeable for different reasons.
Nobody
Contracts
wants that
too.
contract. Yeah.
Yeah, but especially, how do I put this nicely? Um, I'm of the opinion right now that the Astros need to bring in some new blood. And there's nothing against the players they have, but if Framber Valdez, where we appear to have maybe a little bit of surplus at some point this year of starting pitching, and even if we don't, um, if he's a player that you can move and get a first baseman or a left-handed hitting outfielder that are major league ready or even major league proven and a prospect, I would do that deal because you need new pieces coming in. You need to get a little bit younger. The Astros have gotten to be an old team, or at least an older team, pretty quickly, and that's concerning. I don't think that the Astros, no matter what comes off the books for next year, and we all know that famously, I think we stopped paying Zach Greinke his deferred money at that point. Abreu's money comes off. The other pitcher, who Montero's money comes off. There's a few others that you could sign Bregman and maybe have a chance to get one of Tucker or Valdez. I don't think there's any world where you get both of them. And I think the reality is that we have done a really good job at replacing starting pitching. And yes, Fromber's the best of what we have, but I think you have to give to get at some point. So if you could get a package even less than what the Orioles gave up for Corbin Burns last year, um, that would be really enticing to me. And I think that was a reliever, a top 75 prospect, number 68, I think, and then another prospect. That's in the what the Brewers ended up winning the division.
Yeah. That's what I mean, though. If you end up, you have to restock the farm system. You have to Again, if you can get a major league ready first baseman or left-handed hitting left fielder, you're going into it means you're going into the season with Hunter Brown as your ace, and I'm completely comfortable with the idea that Hunter Brown is the ace of the staff right now.
Well, I mean, the Astros are going to have a crunch too, and I know this isn't really just the show. We're going to have a 40-man roster crunch at some point because let's pretend McCullers comes back and is healthy.
McCullers doesn't exist anymore. He's like the
But you have to
boogeyman.
you've got to account for his roster spot. Garcia is going to come back. France is scheduled to come back. Javier might come back. Um, so you've got a bunch of starting pitching that you've got to deal with, and you only have this. I know it's not a rule, but at some point, teams do allocate a certain amount of their 40-man roster to starting pitching, and as like they do to position players, like they do to relievers, da da da. So then you're talking about exposing guys to waivers or outright releasing them because you're forced to make roster moves. At some point, one of those starting pitchers, and yes, I'm picking the best one that we have because he has the most trade value, but at some point, you've got to make some sort of movement one way or the other. So something's going to have to give, assuming everybody comes back healthy. I know that's kind of a stretch with the guys we're talking about right now and the
Yeah.
injuries they had, but um, I'm all on board. Tucker would be a harder sell for me just because we have no outfielders. Although evidently Zach DeZenzo is playing the outfield in winter ball right now, and Joe Espada was saying how well he was hitting, well he was handling the position, which again tells me that we don't have a plan for first base. So
No, it's
it's
exactly
there's
yeah, yeah. That's what I
um
mean. Though I do think you're right. I think we need the next couple of years to really get clarity at these positions and go forward. Like, I don't blame anybody for the situation that the Astros are in because they kept that window open way longer than anyone projected they would. These are just natural things you run into when you've been good for a long time.
yeah it's it would not be without regret that you dealt one of those guys, but I think the Astros need to be shook up a little bit. If you
Well,
can
as I
resign.
told, as I told the Shipley's donut guy when I was picking up donuts today for my screenwriting students, he was like, "Why don't they just let Bregman go? Because just like Pena, the next guy's coming up." And I said, "This time there isn't a next guy. Like they had an idea that Pena would be at least a good glove for a shortstop. There's nobody in the, there's not a single person in the farm system right now that you think can come close to giving you at least one part of Bregman's game."
No, at all. And I think Bregman's situation is unique because he is so ingrained. And at some point, the Astros have to make a decision on what veterans matter to us, and it can't just be Jose Altuve. And hopefully, it's Jordan Alvarez that's in this equation that we're talking about, and that we're breaking the bank to re-sign him at some point. We've got a few years to worry about that. But I think Bregman's one of those guys. I don't think we have many other guys on the roster like that. Tucker, you could argue, is one of those guys. Um, and this organization has been very willing to let Carlos Correa walk and George Springer walk and Charlie Morton walk and Garrett Cole walk and Justin Verlander walk at least once. Um, so I think, change is one of the few constants in baseball, and I think it's probably time for some of those things to shake up. Uh, Astros fans will hate it because we have Astros fans who are in love with Chas McCormick and think Jake Myers is just one game away from turning it all around, and that's great. That's part of being a fan, and that's part of being spoiled by winning a lot. But the reality is, I don't know that we have untouchable guys on our roster anymore. Altuve is untouchable because of status, not necessarily performance at this point.
Sure.
uh Jordan's the guy that I would say is untouchable on this roster. Everybody else is, could you improve your team? And I think that's the way Dana Brown has to look at it. And I'm glad he is looking at it that way.
Yeah, and I think the final point on that, and what the difference between Tucker and Bregman is that Bregman adds a third intangible element to the team that I'm not sure Tucker does. I'm not sure it's even
Pitching coach.
well, yeah, and I just think Tucker's a little bit of an aloof guy, right? He's not really he's a grinder. Nobody's going to diss him, but I think Bregman brings that kind of oomph that's not afraid to get in a teammate's face and get him moving in the right direction. I think when you're talking about a veteran team that's now going to be rebuilding with younger and younger guys, you need that kind of personality.
Well, and this is third party, so it's relayed to me. But one of the concerns when they were bringing Kyle Tucker up is that in the minors he wasn't really I don't want to say well liked because I don't think anybody was mad at him or didn't like him or anything, but he wasn't a team guy in the minors. It was very much about him. And then there's a lot of guys like that, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Sure.
But one of the pieces that the Astros were concerned about was that how do you integrate yourself into the team concept that they're really trying to build at the major league level and become a part of that with that personality. I think he's changed a little bit over the years and being around the team and getting comfortable, but that was a concern the Astros had with him in the minors. And
It's the
how
same
much is
reason
that?
why Kevin
I mean, how
Costner.
much is that? How much is that still in play? How much does Kyle Tucker, ultimately for a lot of these guys, how much do they want to play in Houston? They do or they don't at some point. Springer didn't want to play there anymore for reasons that we've talked about. Altuve
Valid
did.
reasons. I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
Altuve did. And I think like even one of the things that I think has been beneficial having Verlander is he's kind of I think sold the identity of the city a little bit of it's not what you think it is. Like Houston's a large metropolitan city with a lot to offer, and I think him and Kate around really helped that perception. But I do think there's some people that think it's a sort of humid, bayou filled backwater town with nothing to do. So therefore, I want to go play in New York or L.A. or somewhere else.
What, having Roger and Kara Clemens on the clubhouse wasn't enough for you, Jim?
It was not enough
How
because
about
Kara
whoever
Clemens never
how
made that.
about whoever Doug Drabeck was married to? They didn't
All I know
value.
is Kate Upton wears that sweater like it's her job, so I'm into it. You know what I mean?
She's a fashion model. It is her job.
Fair. You see,
Wear things.
but I do want to throw it back to something to a bit of a recorded conversation we had before the show. Enjoy the musings that come to our head, and we will see you guys on Friday. Favorite hoodies is a woman's hoodie. I'm sorry, they're better designed. If you zip it up, you can't tell.
Well, I mean, zippers are one thing. Buttons going the wrong direction or, that's where I kind of go, okay, this is awkward.
Yeah, yeah,
Which is why the whole Michael Scott wearing a woman's suit thing never sat well with me because you would know immediately.
yes.
At,
Yeah.
he's in his 40s in that show, presumably, you would know immediately that something's wrong.
With how I'm putting the suit on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not wrong, my friend.
Or the fact that it had no pockets, which is just, bizarre.
Yeah, it's like when Jessica flips out when she finds a dress she likes that has pockets. It's like,
Oh my God, what is that?
yeah.
I do not understand. And I know this is not the purpose of this show. You may be
Although now
recording
I'm going to add it
this
to the
point.
end just because this is funny.
But literally, I don't understand why women put up with the nonsense that goes into the women's clothing industry. First of all, your sizes are based on absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
But they become beholden to it. Well, I can't wear more than a six, but it doesn't fit you. But it says it's a six, but it's not a six because that six is a completely different six from some other person's six. But you guys continue to buy from the places that size things wrong.
yeah,
Well, how do you size your clothes? By inches.
by inches.
It's an objective measure.
Yeah, I have a
And then
34 hat and a 34 waist and a 7 hat. Rock and roll.
and then they find jeans that fit, but they don't have pockets, but they're designed to look like they have pockets. It would be less effort to just give them pockets. And yet they continue to buy these clothes and complain about them. I do not understand.
This is the things we talk about pre-show. Everybody, favorite hoodies is a woman's hoodie. I'm sorry, they're better designed. If you zip it up, you can't tell.
Well, I mean, zippers are one thing. Buttons going the wrong direction or, that's where I kind of go, okay, this is awkward.
Yeah, yeah,
Which is why the whole Michael Scott wearing a woman's suit thing never sat well with me because you would know immediately.
yes.
At
Yeah.
He's in his 40s in that show, presumably, you would know immediately that something's wrong.
With how I'm putting the suit on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not wrong, my friend.
Or the fact that it had no pockets, which is just, bizarre.
Yeah, it's like when Jessica flips out when she finds a dress she likes that has pockets. It's like,
Oh my God, what is that?
yeah.
I do not understand. And I know this is not the purpose of this show. You may be
Although now
recording
I'm going to add it
this
to the
point.
end just because this is funny.
But literally, I don't understand why women put up with the nonsense that goes into the women's clothing industry. First of all, your sizes are based on absolutely nothing.
Yeah,
But they become beholden to it. Well, I can't wear more than a six, but it doesn't fit you. But it says it's a six, but it's not a six because that six is a completely different six from some other person's six. But you guys continue to buy from the places that size things wrong.
Yeah,
Well, how do you size your clothes? By inches.
by inches.
An objective measure.
Yeah, I have a
And then
34 hat and a 34 waist and a 7 hat. Rock and roll.
and then they find jeans that fit, but they don't have pockets, but they're designed to look like they have pockets. It would be less effort to just give them pockets. And yet they continue to buy these clothes and complain about them. I do not understand.
This is the things we talk about pre-show, everybody.